Working Artist Project is brought to you by Second Line Arts Collective. Learn how you can support at secondlinearts.org.
We're creating a platform for those who are curious, one that tells the story from the artist's perspective. Moments in time, captured from the innovators who are reshaping dance, music, theater, and the visual arts. This is the Working Artist Project.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Working Artist Project. My name is Gregory Agid. Darrian, how you doing tonight?
Man, I forgot I turned my mic down. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You know what it is, Greg? Like every week I'm trying you're here with me. So, I'm always trying something different, which always throws me off a little bit. But I'm excited tonight because we got the one and only Lydia Liebman with us.
Yes,
and we're going to get to the bottom of things, man. We're going to get to the bottom. I'm excited because she's a publicist, man. And she's one of the most prolific, one of the most sought after publicists in the world. And she's got some dope artists on her roster, like Lakeisha Benjamin, who's been on this show.
Nice.
Regina Carter. And I can just go on and on and on and on. But you know what I'm really excited to talk to her about?
What's that, Darrian?
What publicists need from the musicians.
So, you telling me that just because I have a band, a publicist is not going to just want to deal with me?
No. Or he, they don't want to, you got to bring something to the table, and we're going to get to the bottom and see what that is tonight.
Awesome.
So without further ado, I would like to welcome Lydia Liebman to the Working Artist Project. Lydia.
Hey guys, how are you?
So good.
Good evening. What's going on?
You're making me laugh with your intro because
we actually rehearsed this. So just
you'd be surprised. Like a lot of the times, I think a lot of people think like the prerequisite to hiring a publicist is just like having a dope band. But yeah, there's so much more. Like, wow.
No way,
right?
Sometimes musicians forget that we're selling something,
Yeah.
And that's the tough part for us. It's like, hey, we got this good band and everybody can really play. And then they call you and you're just like, okay, what's the story?
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot to it. And it's complicated. And there's all these different little things that play into success, if you're going to hire a publicist. But no, thanks for having me, you guys. And also, Darren, you forgot to mention, you were mentioning like clients, like, hello, yourself. You forgot to mention yourself.
The most important client of them all, me. That's
come
right.
on.
Darrian Douglas to the moon.
Yeah, come on. We can't forget. And that was a fun campaign actually with your record. And I actually think about your campaign a lot because I remember like we had gotten a review from a journalist who was like a total piece of shit. And he wrote, like that journal, that artist, should not get involved in like politics or like tough issues. And I was like, bro, like, and what? And he also like lives in the UK and like had no idea what was going on here at the election, and he's not even on my list anymore, so thank you. But wow. it was I actually think about that a lot because artists deal with that kind of stuff differently, and I always think about how you guys handled it, and I thought you guys were aced it when we were dealing with that guy.
I was doing a lot of yelling behind the scenes, but
whatever it takes.
Yeah, he told us to shut up and play, and it was not fun to hear. You know what I mean?
You should like just shut up and write well, which he didn't. So anyway, it doesn't matter. It was a good time. I enjoyed it. So Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I before we get into this, because we don't have a whole lot of time, I do want to kind of get some background and let people know, because you don't work for someone, you work for yourself. You built your own business from nothing. You know what I mean?
Say?
What did Drake say? Even though I hate Drake, started from the bottom, but now we're here. So that's right. Let's hear it. Let's hear about why you got started in this specifically.
Yeah, so I started my company about 10 years ago. It just had our 10-year anniversary last month, which I kind of count that from like the first time I was paid money to promote a show. So that was in October of 2011. And I got started when I was in college. I was at Emerson College and Berklee College of Music simultaneously, did this joint program thing. And I should probably back up and mention that I came from a musical family. My father's a musician, my mother's a musician. I was always in jazz, and it was kind of just what I knew, but I didn't always love it. I went through many, many years of, revolting against what your parents do and like. So obviously, like I couldn't like jazz because that would make me, like a loser to like my parents' stuff. So I had to really like take the time to get there. And then eventually I was like, oh my God, wait, John Coltrane's kind of amazing. Like, what is wrong with me? And I got my life together, but it wasn't a thing that happened quickly. It took me some time of, being a teenager. And then eventually I was involved in musical activities. I used to sing and play piano and all that stuff. So I did all that, but I always kind of knew the business side and just growing up around it. And you kind of, I don't know, you pick up things just without realizing it. And then when I went to college, I got really involved in radio. I got really involved I was always into journalism and writing, but even more so. And before I knew it, I had this radio show. It was a jazz program. I had a lot of friends on that show, and they would come on and talk about their concerts. And it kind of one thing led to another, where it was like, well, I'm having these people on my show to advertise their gigs. Like, how can I take that a step further? And I felt like a lot of my friends we all really didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. Like, we just kind of felt our way along and started doing posters and flyers. And, it just started really organically and really naturally. And, it was a whole thing. And I did that all throughout college. And then I moved to New York here in 2014 when I graduated. And when I moved to New York, I was like, well, like, am I going to do this? Am I going to do something else? Like, what's going to be the vibe? And I decided to just go with it. I said, I'm going to give it like a year and a half and like see how this is. And people kind of kept hiring me for stuff. And before I knew it, I was like, oh shit, I guess like we're doing this. and this is the gig. But it was definitely, it took years. I always say like the first 5 years really felt like me just kind of winging it and just learning how things went as they went. And then eventually I got okay at it. And now I hope I'm better than okay, but it definitely took a lot of time to get there. Yeah.
What you mentioned earlier that you were kind of revolting against your parents and in your dislike for jazz music. And it's I find that ironic because you are essentially a jazz publicist these days. And so what changed that perspective? And
yeah. It's a good question. I think it was just, when you grow up around something, you don't always appreciate it when it's in front of you. And I mean, I grew up literally, the minute I was born, my dad always tells a story, like he was playing like Crescent on a flute in like the room I was born in, so it was, you can't escape like when you're born into that kind of environment, it's kind of, it's just part of the vibe. So when you're a kid growing up, it's, I was like having to go to gigs really late at night. I was in the backstage till 1 a.m, 2 a.m, like sleeping, with my mom and I hanging back there and just wanting it to be over because like I'm so tired. And, when you're a kid, you don't really know what's going on. You're just like, oh man, I got to go to like Birdland again, or oh, I've got to go to like, like got to get in the tour bus, and so that type of thing when you're growing up, like just part of the vibe. So I think naturally you're like, oh gosh, like I don't want to have anything to do with that because this is what I am around all the time. But really actually what happened was one day I was like 13 or something, and going through like my dad's record collection, and I pulled out like there was this Coltrane box set. I think it was like the Columbia box set. It had like the 8 CDs or something like that. And the first thing I pulled was like Live at the Village Vanguard, and I heard that and I was like, oh shit, this is like incredibly great. And it was weird. It was like something finally clicked in my head where I was like, oh shit, this is great. Like I felt it. I was like, okay, if I just let myself like this, I think I'm going to really love this. And then it was kind of just like allowing me to just kind of like let the the teenager shit go, and then you kind of can get into it. So then I Bill Evans at the Montreux Jazz Festival was like my real record where I listened to that, wore it out, and then I started just really love jazz. But it really took time. It was not an easy thing. And I also had, friends that were musicians. And as I got older, it just became obvious that this was my people. This was like my thing. But yeah, it was, when you grew up in that kind of environment, it's a different thing. And that's why I'm always really curious when I meet musicians and people, I ask them like, what got you into jazz? Because for me, it was just so innate and so natural, but I'm always so curious what taps other people and how they get there. It's like one of my favorite things to ask people. So yeah, that's how I got there.
It sounds like a similar experience to me. I mean, I hate to admit this too, but the first couple of times I heard jazz, I wasn't the biggest fan.
Yeah.
Sure, it's hard, you know, it's hard. And when you're a young kid hearing that, you know, it takes
Oh,
some
dude,
time.
we all hate it at first, you know. What is
It's like
this?
broccoli. I love broccoli now, though. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Yeah, it takes some time, but no, jazz is the best, man. Like I love it. And now I mean, obviously it's always been, but now it's even more so, just it's like so ingrained in my life. It's just, no way I could do anything else.
If you had to explain to someone who is from Mars, what the heck is a publicist, you know?
Okay, so you really like don't even need to be from Mars to like not know what a publicist does. Like I don't think like, I mean, I barely know what I do. I would say that a publicist's job is to publicize, is to spread the word. It's to promote and to be the conduit between an artist or whoever you're being hired by and the public or the press. I mean, there's all these different degrees of what a publicist does. In our world, though, it is kind of the in-between between the artist and the press. So in my case too, like I'm not really dealing a lot with the general public. I mean, I used to, and I did concert promotion, but these days it's like I'm really interfacing with, you know, with journalists and radio hosts and media, basically. And that's what we do. We, you know, spread the good word. And our job is to get people interested in our clients and to, you know, get them to cover it in some fashion or some way.
So usually, I'm just going to predict how this usually goes. It's like we're going to spread the good word, and we have Johnny over here, who's the best piano player that I've ever heard in my life. And we send the article to Downbeat, and they just say like, "Hey, Johnny's the best guy ever." And then like a month later, you're like, "Tony's the best saxophone that I've ever heard."
Yeah. I really do wish it was that easy. Yeah, you know, at a total basic level, I get that is yes. At the total baseline, sure, that's how it is. But a good publicist or just a publicist doing their job at all. The idea though is to find what makes that particular artist stand out. So what differentiates Johnny from Bobby from Steve, who all play piano and, you know, all kind of maybe have similar attributes or, you know, are in the same scene or in the same circle. It's like, what is it that we can find from these artists that makes them stick out? So for me, one of the really important things when I'm considering an artist and considering a project is actually the story. Like, what was the inspiration behind this recording? You know, how did you and the band come together? Is this a regular band? Did you get them together just for this recording? You know, what was the interaction like in the studio? Tell me about the creative process. You know, it's like, I want to know these little things so that I can kind of help formulate a compelling narrative and a compelling story, because the music is just one little part of it. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with this, there's all these different components. So you have like the music, you've got the story, then you have about the artists themselves, you know, like where are they in their career? Because that, you know, gives a lot of indication on what kind of press they're going to get. So, I mean, there's all these like little puzzle pieces that all kind of have to work together. And it's kind of my job and my colleagues' job to sort of figure out like how they fit together and like what pieces of that puzzle like we want to emphasize. And you know, sometimes it does come down to, this is like a really killing guy and he's amazing and you would be crazy not to check him out. I mean, every now and then there's like a wonderkin that comes across the radar, but what I always say about that is, if you're the only person telling people how amazing someone is, chances are they're not quite as life-changing as they might think they are. And so
does
that's
that person's mom or dad count also, or is it just
it's a whole other discussion, but you know, yeah, no, they definitely don't count. It's just like, yeah, you know, it's funny because as I'm sure you can imagine, like I get cold calls all the time, constantly, and we're constantly getting stuff, and I'll get people like, man, but you haven't heard so and so play. Like, this is like, it's another level. It's going to change your life. Like, everyone, once they hear it, they're going to get it. And I mean, sometimes it is really good, but so much of the time it's like, at this point, it's like, if you're the only person telling me that, and I would be the only person then relaying that, it's probably not what you think it is. So there's all these kind of like little things, you know, that.
So
that
what exactly are you looking for, like when someone comes to you for
Yeah.
publicity?
You know, it's so funny because like what I'm looking for has changed actually a little bit with COVID. So like before COVID, I think like I was a little bit more idealistic before COVID. Maybe I wouldn't say naive, but I think that there was more room for kind of greener talent to grow, if that makes sense. I feel like now post COVID, there's been a lot of journalism jobs that have gotten lost. A lot of publications have shut down. A lot of radio stations have downsized. So the openings and the opportunity for people to get coverage these days, it's different than it even was a year and a half ago. So if you asked me this like 2 years ago, I would say, well, for me, I really want to see a good story. And obviously the music has to be good. And, you know, it should be, they have to obviously be a great musician. Like I got to be able to play so that if they're live, you know, people are not going to be completely disappointed when they see them live. Like everything's got to kind of align. But now these days, I'm also, in addition to that stuff, I'm also kind of looking to see like where they are in their career. You know, it's like I used to take a ton of debut projects. And now I feel like I can't take as many as I would have because there's just not a lot of opportunity. And like, I don't want to rip those artists off. You know, we all want to give everyone a good shot and be fair and everything. So these days I'm also kind of looking at like where they are in their career. And if it is a debut project, it's like, I really, really, really want to understand like what it is they're looking to get out of this experience. You know, are they aware of the playing field? And, you know, just kind of get a read on the personality. So that actually plays a lot too into whether we take somebody as kind of like how the artist is and their temperament and all that. So it kind of differs per se. But generally though, story, good music, can play, and you know that they're not out of a box somewhere. You know, they've been around for a second.
Lydia, one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about, because in the community, I do hear this a lot, this phrase. I'm sure you know it as a publicist. A lot of people are like, man, I paid that publicist all this money and nothing didn't happen. Or I didn't get this art, you know, because in their mind, the music, their presentation is beautiful and they should be getting written up in every magazine and blog and this and that. How do you manage expectations from artists? Because you have to get paid for the work, whether you know, if something comes out of it or not. That doesn't mean you didn't do the work. It's just like maybe those people didn't bite, right?
Totally. It's hard, you know. It's difficult. I mean, I try to be very upfront and transparent with my artists from the get-go. You know, from the first conversation, I try to be really clear about like, look, here's where things are right now. Here's what I'm seeing. Like, here's the ROI that you can kind of expect or hope to get from this experience. But I always say, like, any publicist that guarantees anything is, to me, is sus, because it's like, we can't, you know, because we're not like, even if we have the best relationship in the world, like I have journalists that are homies, you know, that I love and that I can call up, you know, in the middle of the night and pitch something to. It doesn't mean they're going to take it. Like they have an editor, you know, they have demographics to you know, to keep track of who's, you know, clicks and downloads and all this. Like there's all these different things that go into play when it comes to someone placing a story. So I try to be really upfront when I'm speaking with artists about what to expect, to be like, look, just because, you know, so-and-so at the New York Times happens to cover these two beats that might fit with your project. And for example, that doesn't mean that he has even the, you know, can cover it, because he has people above him that are, you know, dictating what can be done. So I try to be really upfront, like what the deal is. I think also too, so much of it is explaining that PR is a long game. And this is not something that happens overnight. I think that a lot of the frustration artists feel, and I totally get it because it's frustrating for me too, is the waiting game. And it's like, you kind of have to just like be patient, let things build up. Then you got to set a foundation, you have to build on that foundation, and it takes so long. Like nobody breaks overnight. They look like they do, but there's so much work that went into them breaking overnight. And that's something that I always just try to be really clear. I also, something with me too, like, I don't know, I also try to be financially sensitive. I mean, honestly, to artists, like I have a certain, like, I'm not going to go above a certain cap, like no matter what. For me, like I could charge more, but I won't, because I don't think it's like, it's just after a certain point, it's like, there's the ROI is not worth it. Like I grew up with musicians, like I know what it's like. I'm married to a musician. It's like, yeah, the PR should not be the most expensive part of your campaign. Like or the part of your album release, in my opinion. So that's another thing. I think if an artist is not paying an arm and a leg and their kid to hire a publicist, you know, it's again, it kind of sets the expectations at a certain degree, as opposed to like if that's the most expensive thing, their whole album drop. So that also plays into it. But so much of it is being upfront and honest.
A lot of times we don't think about all of the components. It's like you're one component of the entire picture. Like, you got radio also, which is a different fee, right? So how do you tell people that, or you know what I mean? Or are you saying like, okay, I want to set you up for success, but you need me, but you also need these other 5 people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, the recipe that they say, the recipe for success for any artist, so they say, is a manager, publicist, and booking agent. Those are the 3 things that everyone wants to have. Now, a booking agent these days is few and far between. Those that are active and doing good work are, they're busy, like they have full rosters. And I feel like with a booking agency, like you really have to be sensitive about who's on your roster, because it's not, an article, it's like, it's a gig. Like you can't have people that are competing directly with each other, or if you are, you have to manage that a certain way. So it's not like the booking agents are there signing up artists left and right. So that's tough. And then a manager, you need to have something to manage to have a manager. And that's the other thing a lot of people mistake, where they're like, well, I need to get a manager. I'm looking for a manager. And I'm like thinking most of the time,
come on, no?
Yeah. I'm like, you want a manager, but like, for what though? Like, what are you doing that you can't manage yourself? Like realistically, because they're going to take a cut. So it's like, you're going to pay 10 to 15% or whatever to someone to take a cut off of it's small. It's just like realistically, it's like, what are we looking at? So yeah, of course, those 3 things are what you'd like to have in order. The people that do have those things in order, though, are usually at like, they've been plugging away at this for 15, 20, maybe even 30 years by the time they get all those things. So that's what I always try to tell people is like, this is the goal, but right now you're probably not ready for a booking agent. You're probably not ready for a manager. Well, definitely not ready for a manager. So it's like, how are we going to fill in those gaps until we get there? So I can help you do XYZ, but you've got to go out and get gigs for this market so that we can have something to push somewhere. If you're trying to get on the radio, obviously you need to hire a radio promoter for that. And if you're trying to reach audiences on social media, which these days we all are, then if your numbers aren't good, you should probably look into hiring someone to help you with that. So, these are all like these little things that kind of play into it. But a lot of the time, the publicist is the one who ends up getting hired without those other things in play necessarily, which does make our job a bit harder. So it is, it's just one little tiny part of like the big microcosm of like having a career. Yeah.
It's like everything you just said, I feel like is one of the toughest things for a musician to digest and fully understand. And I'm just, from my personal experience, I remember being part of the music industry program at Loyola. And every time we would have these conversations, I was just like, well, you don't get it. Like, I'm really good.
Yeah.
And that's just where my head was. And so I feel like I can understand, the complexity and kind of like communicating to a musician that like, you got to get a story together. You have to have something to sell. And a lot of times what we're selling is not actually the music. Oh. And so maybe like, I was wondering if you could like further break down, like what can a musician do to have a story, to have something compelling, to garner an audience or make your job easier?
Yeah. The thing that's tough about that is that you don't want to fabricate a story or make a story just for the sake of making a story, because we can kind of tell, I can tell when an artist has shoehorned a narrative into his project. And it's kind of like, you kind of have to start, you have to kind of, I think at least, everyone probably has different opinions on this, but for me, it's like, I feel like you really have to start in an organic and true and honest place. So the idea has to be coming from you, and then you figure out, how you want to put that into your record or whatever it is you're doing. And then that is what's brought to a publicist, something that's already been, brewing, that is something that's an important story to you, not something that you just like fabricated to pitch to a PR person, because again, like we can usually see through it. And I have nothing, it happens like all the time. People are trying to create stories around things, or maybe they did just make a burner record. And I'm like, we got to get more out of this. Like, tell me something, like the song track 3, like what's that about? Like, I don't know, like we just improvised in the studio, just came up with it. Well, like, was your cat sick or something? Like, can we say you were thinking about that? Like I'm like, well, like, what was the color of the sky that day? Like, can we say that it was like the darkness of like the clouds, like, like influenced your dark mood, and that's why it's not, I mean, there's like all these things that we we try to create if we have to, but the projects that do the best are those that come from an organic and true place. So I think that when it comes to the story, having it be a genuine story, first of all, is what's important. The other thing is also, and this is going to kind of negate everything I've said, but it is true that not everything needs to be a symphony either. And not everything needs to be a major production. Some things can just be a burner, and they can just be a session. And that's cool. And we can go in with that. But then, in that case, then we want to go back to what we said before and say to the client, temper expectations maybe, because you might be dealing with like a slightly different situation because your narrative is this or isn't this, So it really depends. It depends on the client, and it depends on their goals and all that stuff.
Yeah. Man, Lydia, this is an education problem, and look at Greg right now. Here we go again. Every week, Darrian talking about education.
I agree with you on this one, though.
Yeah, because I think this should be, we need you, people like you, we need you specifically. We're gonna hire you for our organization to come teach some of this stuff.
Anytime.
So, yeah, but like we should teach these principles in middle school for sure, if not earlier, because like, when you get out of college, they just pat you on the ass like, all right, guys, go out there and play some gigs. And you just like, but how do I get a gig?
Yeah. Totally, man. It's a problem. I mean, look, I went to Berkeley and Emerson College. I went to two like schools that are supposedly like the top in their field in media and music. And like, I was never, I took music business classes. Like, we never really got taught this stuff, at all. I think the closest thing I had was at Emerson. I had a class that the professor taught me, it was like, actually, it was a producing class. It was how to be a producer. And that was the only class where like, they actually explained like, hey, this is how a grant works, or this is how, what else did she say? I think that's the only thing I took away from it was how to write a grant. But like, that was really important because at least I now understand, how, at least to a degree, like, oh, wow, this is how a grant works. Like, I know how to kind of write one. And thank goodness, and she just like taught us that because she happened to be knowledgeable in that field. It wasn't like part of the curriculum. So, which is so interesting. So I agree. It's a kind of an issue because I feel like if you grow up knowing that like, yeah, you are a musician, you are an artist, but this is going to be your career. These things, like, you have to know these things. I'm with you.
Yeah. Is it ignorant for me to say something like I mean, like, as I'm hearing all this, like, I think that like this, when you're talking about the story, like Miles Davis or something, like Miles is a compelling story because he played with Charlie Parker, and then he has a whole resume of cats. But I guess younger musicians, we just study the art side of things, like Darrian is saying. And do you think like for cats like Miles or Coltrane or even maybe your dad, like the same like publicity principles that like we're kind of talking about now, were those things in play back then for their careers? Or like, is this a unique issue due to the fact that the industry has completely changed over the last couple of years?
It's a good question. I think, well, publicity and PR has always been part of the equation since the beginning of the entertainment business. So it definitely, I think though, the method of course, the method of telling those stories has changed so much. And that is what dictates so much of how we approach our jobs. So for example, I mean, even in the past 10 years, since I started my business to now, it has changed so much. I mean, social media has changed everything and made everything have to be so quick. And it's like, people don't have the attention span or the wherewithal to digest a very, a long, deep dive article these days. I mean, they do about certain things. I mean, people were writing about Coltrane, until the end of time, like we know, but the idea for getting that for every client is impossible because it doesn't generate clicks. It doesn't generate, readership. I mean, sometimes the most heartbreaking email I get is from an editor who's like, yeah, like we actually aren't running reviews anymore because people tap out after reading the first 3 lines. So we're just doing premieres and like playlists now, and this happens all the time because people tap out. So it's a different scene. I think back then, you had a lot more opportunity for people to really write about this music. So it was different. Obviously, you go back way far back, you're talking about this music being much more popular than it is now. We're also dealing with such a competitive market. So it's very different in that regard. But also, I think something that's interesting is that the level right now, my dad and I talk about this sometimes, it's like the level's really high. Like the level now is extremely high in the sense that kids are coming out of college before actually coming out of high school, and they're burning already because they've been starting on this so early and they have everything at their fingertips. I mean, the internet has changed everything. So you can see everything right away. And this is something like my dad like is still like that can't believe. He's like, man, you can just like go on and find like this bootleg of Train like doing that. Like he never had that growing up, so that kind of exposure has just made for musicians to be just absolutely killing. So everyone's good. So when everyone's really good, it's harder to stand out. Being really good, you have to be beyond good. You have to be amazing. You have to be incredible. You have to have something else that really pushes you forward. So I think that has definitely changed the landscape a bit. But yeah, Miles had a great story. I mean, he was also extremely cool. Like, I don't know, I like who wouldn't want to cover Miles Davis? So yeah, it was definitely good to be Miles at the time.
I guess a lot of times, like we just like specifically with Miles too, like he was like a social character, a social icon too, in addition to his music. So I guess a lot of people as musicians, we just are like, well, Miles did, Kind of Blue, and then he did Bitches Brew, and that's why he's famous.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. It's you need to have my dad on the show. He'll give you some tidbits and then you'll know why Miles was famous. But those are not my stories to tell, so I won't. But yeah, it's you got to like look at the time and place and context is everything.
Yeah, I think these new musicians are not social creatures, and so I've been trying to have a conversation with some of them. You like, okay, I mean, even people in our generation is rough in that, and also there's like something happened, especially in jazz, where pop culture was the devil, and so like a lot of times people aren't even in touch what is current. Like Drake is current, Ghost is current. But if you're creating music like Coltrane and them, we're creating music, but also referencing current music.
Right.
So if you're in some kind of a loop where you're just creating music that you just hear that has nothing to do with popular culture, you can't relate to popular culture. No one's gonna give a fuck. Like, I just hate to say it. Like,
no, it's so true. It's so true. I mean, it's a major disconnect. And I think you put it correctly when you said, pop culture became like the antichrist of jazz musicians, was like, oh my gosh, how dare you even bother listening to whatever, and yeah, I don't subscribe to that thought myself. I think that the way to keep this music moving forward is to incorporate and adapt to the times, because, the time is not going to stop. Like, we're going to keep moving forward. And if we are stuck in one pattern and one thing, like, we're never going to grow. And I mean, our audience is just going to keep diminishing. I mean, you look out at a major concert hall and everybody is elderly, like they're not going to be here forever. So who's going to be coming to these shows and keeping this music sustained? And I don't think it's, I just, yeah, I don't agree with the whole, the jazz police thing, which, of course I dealt with this my whole life, and it's not something I think is the way to be. So I'm with you.
If a musician is out there like looking to headline festivals and things like that, and maybe like garner like a top tier headliner type status, do you feel like the artist should consider like maybe compromising, but maybe adapting their music to more contemporary styles, like maybe like a Kamasi Washington kind of character or kind of style? Or do you think that you can play free jazz and have a compelling story that elevates you to like MTV or something?
Honestly, you never really know like what's going to hit. I mean, if you had told me before Kamasi was big that Kamasi would be big, I mean, I don't know, like I guess I probably would have seen it because I dig it, but I don't know if like my dad would see it, for example. Like, I think he probably would be like, what? Like, there's no way that would ever be popular. And, sometimes things just catch on. I don't really think you need to compromise your artistry to fit into anyone's box. I do think, though, it's important to be like aware of what's going on and to make a decision. I guess it's better to put it like this, to make an informed decision if you choose to include that into your musical artistry, if that makes sense. Not to just do it because you think it's going to make you popular, but if you feel genuinely like it's going to enhance what you're doing, I think then sure, by all means, but it has to be coming from a genuine place.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's an audience for everything though. And I'll tell you something that's really interesting, and I just got off of it, but like the past 2 weeks has been the Grammy season, and where people are voting for the first round of the Grammy entries. And I help some of my clients, kind of go through this process. And so because of that, I get to hear a lot of music, and I hear music from like all over genres, like children's music, global music, Americana. I mean, 2 weeks of listening to what's on this ballot, and we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of entries. There is something for everyone. I mean, there is music out there that I cannot believe is being made. I mean, it doesn't mean it's good. Like some of it is way out, and I'm like, oh my God. But there's an audience for it, and someone who believed in this music enough to produce a record and put it on the Grammy ballot. This isn't like people in their basement doing a demo. I mean, these are like people invested money because they believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, like every year when I go through this process, it kind of, in a way, it's wild, but it also kind of just reinforces like, wow, there's only 12 notes, yet there's so much you could possibly do with it. And there is something for everyone. The key is finding your people. And that is where you hope a publicist comes in who can help expose you to those people that will dig what you're doing.
Yeah, that's deep. That's the trickiest part, especially when you're, in a niche market like jazz. It's like, all right, how do I find my people? How do I get them to buy my records? Which is, it's like damn near impossible these days. It's like people don't really understand how musicians make money. You know what I mean? I think they think we make money by looking pretty. You know what I'm saying? What do you think, Greg? I know I'm pretty, but that ain't how I get paid. You know what I'm saying?
As you're saying that, I'm thinking, Lydia, you ever check out this guy named Seth Godin?
Well, no, I don't think
Oh,
so.
you gotta check Seth out.
I love Chet. But no, he had this thing where he was saying, he was like, like Nike didn't invent the running community. They just like, the running community always existed, and they just sold their product to them. So I guess that's the same thing as like musicians too. A lot of times we have this idea that we're on the fringe and no one knows or appreciates what we're doing, but again, I guess the publicist is the connector between the artist and the existing community.
Which cats need to hear that, because it's like, I don't, like you said, they don't really know what you do. They just know I should get a publicist because I recorded a record, but for what purpose? You know what I mean?
Exactly, man. It's it is hard to explain what we do, because I also feel like PR, at least me, I mean, I don't know, I probably, because I've did this without really knowing what I was doing when I started. I just kind of like went with it. So I don't know. I'm always like wearing like 1,000 different hats at once. And I feel like I'm always doing like so many different things, but it's a lot that goes into it. Like there's so many different elements that go into this process where, that's why like when I get clients every now and then, like I've been so lucky, like 99.9% of the people I work with are amazing and they're great people. And I rarely ever have issues, but every now and then I'll get like some rando who's like, well, I didn't get that downbeat review. And so I don't want to pay you, and it's like, and I'm just like, listen, the amount of work that like went into you to not get that downbeat review was insane. And like, you probably should be doing being thankful, because maybe a bad review, like maybe that's why you didn't get it, but truthfully though, it's like there's so much work, so much that goes into it, that sometimes it's really hard to explain actually what a publicist does, because I feel like we do everything. So that's also why it's hard to pinpoint it.
I do want to ask a question, and maybe this is an insider question and you can't answer it, but how do you get the contacts? Like how, what do you do to even build that type of contact list?
I built my contact list from scratch. So I never subscribed to a database. I never really asked. There was some PR people I did ask for certain things, but I was really conscious to not ask for like a list. I've never asked another person for a list in my life. The reason why is I never wanted to be indebted to anyone else. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the truth. Like I've always kind of had this mentality that like I always just wanted to like do my own thing, and I kind of like dealt with enough honestly, I dealt with enough bullshit being my dad's daughter, where people were like, well, she's just getting it because of Dave. I swear to God, like this happened all the time. It still happens, you know, which is insane, but it happens all the time. And it's like, that's not true. Like my dad didn't even know, like he hired a publicist for the first time ever, you know, when I was in college, because he got the NEA award, you know, like he didn't even have a publicist his whole life. Like he just got a manager at 70 years old. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, wow. It's like, this actually was really, really disconnected from what my dad was doing in his career. So, you know, I already kind of had that. So I was like, all right, I really want to be careful to not give the impression that I'm like exploiting that or like anything like that. Cause I'm, even if I could, I don't even know how I would, because he doesn't have what I need. He doesn't have the contacts because my dad doesn't know. So it was kind of like that kind of mentality kind of made it that I was really very like independent this whole time. So I literally was like surfing and, you know, like literally just looking for contacts. I mean, my first couple of years was me digging. I was not part of like Cision or any PR lists or anything like that. And it was really hard. And a lot of it was really difficult. I mean, the first 5 years, oh my goodness, I would show up at like the Jazz Connect conference or whatever. And I mean, the only people that knew me were people that remembered me from when I was like a young kid, like running around when my parents were at this type of conferences and like, oh, you're so tall now. And I'm like, oh, I'm trying to be respectful. Thank you. You know, it was really hard. It was like, oh, it's David Karras's kid. That's so cute. You know, but it's like, no, I'm really trying to like do this on my own. So it was really hard. I mean, it took a lot of work. So that's how I got the contacts, was me literally like researching the shit out of all of this stuff and just always watching. Like the minute I would see someone cover jazz somewhere, I was like screenshot. I was like, oh my God, who is that? You know, and try to find them. And I also am actually a little, it probably doesn't come across in this podcast or this interview, but I am a little like kind of shy sometimes when I have to meet people new. Like, and so I didn't have really even the confidence to like go up to a journalist at a show. Like I was like not confident to do that. Like I'd be like, oh my God, they're going to be like, why is this girl bothering me? So I wouldn't even do that. Like that was really hard for me. So yeah, I still get nervous to pick up the phone sometimes. It's ridiculous. Like it's syndrome, imposter syndrome, it never leaves you. But that's how I did it, just from the beginning. And then eventually they start coming to you and they start out, you know, then journalists start coming, and then, you know, now it's different, but that's how I did it.
I guess that's also too one of the most important things to remember, is that like this whole industry is about connections or about relationships with people, you know, and as a musician too, who spends, you know, as a musician who spent many countless hours in a room by himself practicing, and then you oftentimes forget, it's like, yo, like you need people to make this dream happen. You need people in the band, you need people in the audience, you need people buying the records, listening to you. And so, you know, we do have to find opportunities for us to connect all the time. I have a completely random question. I'm going to throw this like in another direction, but I grew up with Jonathan Baptiste. And in the last couple, like the other day, I was watching the Facebook Metaverse Unreveal, and he's like scrolling through iTunes, and John's record is the one they're scrolling through. Right. And, you know, man, I wish him all the best. He's an amazing role model and musician and everything. But I was maybe wondering, do you have to sing if you want to reach that level of stardom? and I mean, and I'm asking that because I was just like thinking about John's, like, you know, like 12-year career from putting out jazz records to starting to play with Wynton and Roy Hargrove, and now he's like literally a pop star.
Yeah, he's a bona fide superstar. Like yeah. he is like the jazz superstar that we have right now. Like, because we only get one. So, yeah. You know, we only get one. So he is definitely like our one. Yeah. It helps to sing. People love voices. They love lyrics. People love lyrics. Kind of. I think it's important. I mean, if you think of the jazz celebrities that we have, you know, you've got John, you have Esperanza, she sings, you know, you've got who's I mean, Kamasi, yeah, but I guess so. I mean, I don't know if he's not like at the level, like John is like another level. Like I would say John Esperanza. I mean, Nora Jones, she sings, Diana Krall, they sing. I mean, yeah, like, you know, of course Wynton is Wynton. I mean, he doesn't sing, but he has everything else. I mean, he's got a whole other thing. I think Terrence Blanchard is kind of getting into this, is kind of hitting that too with his stuff at the Met. You know, I mean, you have cultural icons. Christian McBride, you know, can kind of fit in there, you know, that are identifiable to more than just the people that are watching this. That's kind of, will my neighbor, the guy down the hall, like, would he recognize Wynton Marsalis if he saw him on the street? I think he probably would, Kamasi Washington, maybe not. Definitely not, actually. So that's kind of like my barometer, yeah, though it's in the end, though, it certainly helps to be accessible. And John is on Colbert. I mean, hello, he's
I guess like as an instrumentalist, I was just maybe wondering, like, sometimes do you have to like set people's expectations to a little more realistic, like, hey, maybe you're not going to get on the cover of Time magazine, but we could try, Clarinet Weekly or something.
No, Clarinet first. Okay, first of all, for the record, if someone out there wants to do Clarinet Weekly or like Double Reed Weekly, I am so down for that. I think every instrument should have their own magazine because like it's the best. So I'm down to definitely support that. But yeah, I mean, I think like nobody thinks that they're going to, like, I have yet to encounter someone who like genuinely thinks that they're going to be, like a global superstar from a jazz campaign. Like, I've certainly had people that think that they could have shadows of that and inklings of that. But thankfully, like, no one has been that delusional to come to me and tell me that. But, it in the end, though, unfortunately, it does come down to like accessibility, and it's like John Batiste is making music now that is, I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was listening to him with Terry Gross. I listen to Fresh Air like every day. And a couple months ago, I was like listening to him and in this interview. And when I heard the music, I hadn't heard his music in a minute, beyond what I hear and see, just around. And I was like, oh my God, like this he's like, he's a pop star, and God bless,
I think the beautiful thing
yeah.
John did, and you can talk about this as a professional in this industry, is he positioned himself not as a jazz musician.
Right.
When he wasn't playing jazz, and he was never playing jazz when he was playing with his band. And I think that's the piece that's missing here. He never called himself a jazz musician because he knew that's death. he wanted to reach the masses, so he called it something else. And he still played the same music. That's the thing. You just sometimes you gotta like Nicholas Payton, it's really the same thing. Nick is just a little bit more, he just rubs people wrong. John just I'm gonna call it something else. I'm gonna do something that's gonna call it a love riot instead of like fuck everybody, is what Nick does. Same thing.
Yeah.
I love Nick. I'm just saying, same thing. In my opinion, different approaches. Nick, come on the show, man. I would love to debate you. And but
yeah.
But you see what I'm saying? He
absolutely
positioned himself like, oh, I'm gonna go out here and play some jazz and then also be a mega star.
Yep. It's important to think about that because unfortunately, the word jazz has, I don't even want to say it has a negative connotation because it doesn't. It has to me, maybe it does to some, but it has a connotation to me that it's, jazz is not popular. Like, it's not popular music. So if you say jazz, it's like, it already puts it in a certain category that people are they shy away from it. So yeah, it all depends on the artist, the kind of artist you want to be. And on the other hand, then you have some people who their whole goal is to be recognized as a jazz musician. I'm trying to think, oh, man, I recently had can't remember who it is, but I had a client who had like a very, 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 very famous friend of theirs, like someone we would all know. And he put out a jazz record and we were all like, why are they doing this? Like, they're billionaires, like what? And it's like, all he wanted is to be like accepted and get admiration from the jazz community, because to him, that was the highest degree of musicianship and artistry that even though he had done all these movies and done all these things, like this was something he really wanted. And I've had clients that come to me that had ventures in business or things, and they're loaded, they had like these amazing careers, like they have all this money and they're putting out a jazz record. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you don't need to do this and waste all your money on this. Like, you're not going to make back your money. Like, what are you doing? But it just is something it's like their thing. Like, they're like, no, like, I want jazz musicians and jazz publications. I'm just like, all right.
Send them to our website. We have a nonprofit. We're doing some stuff with some kids. Tell them we need the support. Them go ahead and hit that. Go ahead, and hit that donate button. It's gonna feed their soul. And we'll record a jazz record with them. I put Greg on it. He played with Michael Bublé. He famous. That's all.
Absolutely. That's big time. Absolutely.
Yo,
Listen.
Lydia, do you have any maybe favorite artists that you've been working with or have been hearing about on the come up that we should know about?
Yeah, that is a loaded question. I don't want to leave anyone out, but I'll tell you some records that I've been really digging. Working a lot of great records right now, but a record I'm definitely digging is Adi Meyerson's new record. I Want to Sing My Heart Out Praise of Life. It's really good. I saw her at Brick Jazz Fest the other day. It was awesome to see that music live. I think that she is just amazing. Another record I'm really digging lately is by Rachel Eckroth, The Garden, which was released on Rainy Days Records. Really good. I have a nice record coming from Henry Cole coming out in a couple weeks, which is awesome. I mean, something that I really love about the way that we've kind of structured this business is like we don't just represent one thing. Like we have Latin jazz. I have more kind of like singer-songwritery jazz stuff. We've got free improvisation. I mean, there's so much to kind of choose from, and I actually do that intentionally so that we're constantly broadening our scope and that we're not just only doing one thing, because I do think it's important to be really, really, really good at one thing. And I totally get, like, for instance, if someone comes to me with like a standards record, a vocal standards record, like most of the time I'm probably going to pass because I'm like, that's really not my wheelhouse, but it could be depending on who the singer is, but it's usually not my thing. But I do know that I'm really good in these like 5 other things. So because of that, I'm always listening to new stuff and I'm always hearing new things. So I would say though that Henry's record, Rachel's record, and Adi's record, they're all very different, but are all super, super special in their own way. And the funny thing is that I'm always listening to my own clients because I'm always having to pitch them and write about them. And I'm always listening to incoming stuff that we're always pitched that I don't get to hear. I mean, I listen to music all the time, but it's rare these days that I get to just like zone out on like a new release and listen from start to finish, and it's not for me working, and that kind of sucks. I'm not gonna lie. Like I do kind of like miss like listening to music for pleasure, which is something I don't get to do that much these days, and that's not great. So I'm trying to get better at it and set time aside where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like actually listen to something that I want to, not that I have to, even if it's great. So yeah, it's kind of like where I'm at right now, which is kind of funny.
I love that, and we gotta go. We got to go, Lydia. This was beautiful, and thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to Smalls. Who's coming to Smalls? Guys, come to Smalls, second set. Free jazz.
Free jazz.
No cover?
There's most certainly a cover. Please pay it. It is for it is. I'm double dipping tonight. It is not just, it's my husband and my father on the same gig. So you guys definitely need to pay the cover. No, but it's cool. I'm gonna run downtown. But this was so fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. I just want to, before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people how they can hook up with you, how they can link you, DM you, and pay you all the money to promote.
Please don't DM me. I'm literally, please, oh my gosh. So I'll take this opportunity to say, no, please don't DM me. Please don't at me. Email is what's up. It might take me a minute to get to it, but email is where I live. But I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, LydiaLiebman.com, also Lydia Liebman Promotions on Instagram and on Facebook. And yeah, you can kind of see what's up and what we have cooking. And yeah, for potential, if anyone is like interested in learning more about a publicist or like wants to talk to us, email is the move. But you might have to follow up a couple times because I'm bad at it lately. I say this because
you got stuff going on.
Yeah, I just like it's hard. It's one. I think you know what it is. You know what a publicist does? They answer emails. That's it. We are just in email.
End of story.
That's like we could just like erase the whole hour and just say that.
The whole hour summed up.
Honestly,
there.
We just answer and send emails. But thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. There you have it, y'all. And we have Miss Lydia Liebman here tonight. And this was I feel like I just got a master class. So, I hope y'all took some notes. So anyway, my name is Darrian Douglas.
And I'm Gregory Agid. Thank you so much, Lydia.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you.
Artist Project, and we'll catch y'all next